Hello and welcome to Fast Talk, your source for the science of cycling performance. I'm your host, Chris Case. Here at Fast Talk, we love a good myth. More than that, we like busting them. From the age-old myth about sleeping in a room with plants to the myth of lactic acid, Coach Connor and I enjoy applying science to firmly held beliefs and turning worlds upside down, or at least correcting misinformation. Today, our focus is a large number of myths about riding and racing in the heat and cold. First, a reminder that we previously covered training in such conditions in episodes 21 and 35. While we'll cover some of the physiology in this episode, check out those shows for a deeper dive into the mechanisms at play. Today, it's all myths. We start with some general myths about temperature. Are there hot and cold riders? Good question. Then we move to myths about heat. Can you adapt? Does pouring water over your head help? And should your drink mix match your sweat? Finally, we tackle myths about the cold. Can you adapt to the cold? Should you over or underdress? Can you damage your lungs? That and much more. Today, we're joined by Dr. Stephen Cheung, a professor in the kinesiology department of Brock University in St. Catharines, Ontario. He is one of the world's preeminent environmental physiologists and studies how humans perform in extreme conditions. He's a well-respected author, chief sports scientist at Barron Biosystems, makers of Exert, and he essentially tortures people as a job, which sounds pretty sadistic and fun. One other note before we get into it. In this time of online symposiums, Dr. Cheung is organizing a virtual environmental ergonomics series. For more info, visit www.icee2021.com. Today we'll also hear from Nick Legan, Shimano's road brand manager and a gravel racing expert who has spent many an hour riding in extreme conditions. We'll also hear from Whitney Garcia, a former pro triathlete who raced in the heat of Kona and other hot climbs throughout her career. So get your slushies, your bar mitts, your Embro? No, skip the Embro. Let's make you fast. Well, it's been since episode 38, believe it or not, 2 years since we've had Dr. Stephen Cheung on the program, so it's great to have you back. I know you are a leading expert in environmental physiology, and that is a very interesting term in itself, so thank you for joining us, and please explain what that means.
I just want to point out, you wrote one of the textbooks that a lot of schools around the world use for environmental extremes. So, I mean, this is truly your area of expertise.
Yeah, first off, thanks for having me back, folks. And you're right, Trevor, I did write a graduate level textbook on environmental physiology, and I'm actually working on the second edition right now during this pandemic. But what is environmental physiology? It's really looking at extreme environments, whether it's cold, whether it's heat, whether it's cold water, high altitude, microgravity, diving, air pollution, all of these things, and what impact that has on our ability to kind of perform as athletes or as workers. So the fun thing about the field is we get to really push our body to its limits, and that we get to really make an impact on everyday life, whether it's population health, looking at global warming and how we develop better heat policies with different cities, to working with Olympic athletes, preparing for things like Tokyo or hot weather events, and also with workers. I've done a lot of work with everybody from firefighters to ultra deep miners to Coast Guard, looking at search and rescue policy to try to make kind of work a lot safer also. So it's a really fun, interesting, both basic field and very applied field.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. And I bet at times you get to put people in extreme conditions in a laboratory setting, which some would probably call torture, but I bet there's rules against torturing people.
Yeah, there's an old saying in my lab that no one's ever comfortable. If you're comfortable, then we're doing something wrong.
Didn't you do a study where you had people shivering for 24 hours straight?
Yeah, that was actually...
You mean person.
Had to bring that up.
that was a study we did in 2010 that was a contract with the Coast Guard and Search and Rescue here in Canada, looking at trying to simulate Arctic survival, trying to look at, can people sustain their shivering capacity for 24 hours. Keep in mind that if you're stranded up in the Arctic, it might take 5 to 7 days to really rescue you. So all of the existing models were based on kind of 2-hour type long studies, which would be a really long kind of lab study. So we decided to really push the envelope and go for 24 hours. And they were eating survival rations. They had no water. They had no entertainment except for a deck of cards. So it was pretty extreme, but it was challenging to do. But I think it was really worthwhile in terms of the science we got out of it at the end.
So what names were they using to describe you by hour 23?
Both the participants and my lab members, they had all sorts of names for me by the end. Keep in mind
Dr. Evil.
Yeah, the participants were in there for 24 hours. We were in there for 40 plus hours, as a team, kind of from before the participants arrived to afterwards. So yeah, it was a pretty challenging study. But again, those are the kind of type 2 kind of fun that you talk about afterwards.
Well, it certainly speaks to your expertise in this niche of physiology, which we want to dive more into, both on the cold side and the hot side. So maybe we should start with a brief overview, a quick physiology lesson here when it comes to temperature extremes.
Sure. Well, I mean, what happens when you get hot is that you have a big competition for blood flow. You're trying to keep cycling. You're trying to send blood to your muscles, but at the same time, you're getting very hot, both from the heat that you're producing by exercising and also because of the environment. So as a result, in addition to trying to send blood to your muscles, you're also trying to send blood to your skin to get rid of heat by increasing the blood flow, trying to send more blood to the skin also for the sweat glands to start sweating and eliminate heat that way. And you're also shutting down a lot of other kind of non-necessary or non-critical systems like to your gut. So I'm sure we've had episodes before where you're talking about training the gut and the impact of that. And so there's a lot of systems at play, but ultimately, instead of really being devoted to sending blood to your muscles, you are kind of having a lot of impaired blood flow to a lot of other systems too. So that's what's happened in the heat. And then in the cold, the real challenge is trying to maintain heat in your body. Instead of trying to get rid of it, you're now trying to maintain heat. And the first thing the body does is try to protect the core, the torso, and the brain. So the heart and the lungs and the brain itself, with the idea that, those are the systems you really need to live. So what becomes less critical is the muscles. And so you have less blood flow going to the muscles. Instead, you are, shunting or restricting that blood back to the really vital organs to stay alive. So it's kind of, it all comes down, a lot of these reasons why we have impairment comes down to all these challenges in the priority for where the blood is going as you are exercising, whether in the heat or in the cold.
So something, I think you were the one who told me this many years ago, but I really like this image, is to think, we think of blood as a transporter, and you think of it transporting oxygen, you think of it transporting nutrients, but it's also a heat transporter. So if you are in hot weather, you want to get that blood up close to your skin because it's taking that heat from your core, getting up to the skin where it can get it out of your body. But in cold weather, it's the exact opposite. You don't want to lose any heat, so you keep all that blood close, deep inside your body where the heat can't really escape.
Yeah, absolutely. So, let's say you're riding along at 250 watts or 200 watts, you're still producing the same amount of kind of heat within your body. But the challenge is that whether you're in the hot or the cold, but if you are in the heat, you are also having the external environment. So if you're, back in the old days in the Tour of Qatar or in 2016, where the Worlds were there, or every year in the Tour Down Under, you have, a lot of extra heat. So not only are you trying to get rid of the heat that you're producing in your body, but you are also having additional heat kind of dumped into your body by the environment. So you're kind of facing a double whammy. The main way the body responds is it is increasing a lot of blood flow to your skin, and to try to kind of get rid of that heat, kind of like a radiator, try to get that warm blood out near the surface of the skin so that it can dissipate to the environment. And again, the other way is through sweating. So those are the big challenges that you're trying to face. And again, in the cold, you're still producing a lot of heat, and that's what shivering is all about. So when we talked about, can you shiver for 24 hours, that's the body trying to maintain extra heat, even if you're not exercising, to keep your body at 37 degrees Celsius, around 96, 97, 98 degree Fahrenheit. So the blood plays a huge role as a kind of heat transporter throughout your body, in addition to moving oxygen around, which is what we're more interested in most of the time in terms of exercise.
Yeah, we've talked a bunch of times on this show about efficiency, and typically your average cyclist is somewhere 20 to 25% efficient, meaning that when they're burning carbohydrates, when they're burning fat, only 20 to 25% of that energy is actually going into the bike. That other 75 to 80% is being lost as heat. But as you said, if you're shivering, that heat is beneficial.
Yeah. So, I mean, heat isn't kind of in that sense a waste product all the time. It is kind of a necessary part of life. It is, again, how homeotherms, like humans who are warm-blooded, maintain kind of a certain level of body temperature throughout. And what's really fascinating about humans is that, from the day you're born to the day you die, through kind of thick or thin, whether you live in the heat, hot environments, live in the cold, whether you're exercising, the body is just phenomenally capable of maintaining your body temperature within a really, really narrow range. And that's one of the fascinating things that continues to kind of inspire me as I study, is just how is the body able to do this? I mean, if you are running a marathon des Sables, versus if you are kind of stranded in the Arctic, for the large part, humans are still able to keep their body temperature really, really steady throughout the course of a day, throughout the course of its life.
So we're not going to dive too deep into the general physiology here because, we've actually already done 2 episodes on that. And I believe we have side interviews with you on both of them. I know definitely on the cold weather one.
Yeah, absolutely.
Episode 21, we talked about managing heat. Episode 35, we talked about dealing with cold weather. I think that's where I got on my giant soapbox because, as everybody knows, my biggest Chris, like, when are you not on a soapbox? My biggest soapbox is people underdressing, and we will get to this, and I'm excited. But today, really what we want to dive into is all the myths about training and racing in both the heat and the cold. And I think this is going to be a lot of fun because there's a lot of myths out there. Where do we want to start? I guess you sent us a kind of a general one that might be a good starting point.
Yeah, I think right at the top of the list is the question, are there really hot weather, in quotes, or, quote, cold weather riders?
And before you answer that, remember, you are a Canadian. We are contractually obligated.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the hilarious thing. It's how people's kind of perception change. I was just an external examiner for a PhD from Australia who was looking at the impact of kind of heat and ambient temperature on high intensity training. Basically, can you do intervals as hard, and how does it impact it in the heat? And their cold condition that they claim was 13 degrees Celsius, and the student was actually from Wisconsin, and I'm going, man, your perspective has changed after 4 years in Australia. If you think 13 degrees Celsius is now cold, but so to get back to whether there are hot or cold weather riders, I think ultimately, we've seen examples of his, Indurain was known for, his love of heat, and it was claimed he never performed well in the Vuelta, which was in April at the time because it was still cold and everything, but yet he thrived in the heat. You have other guys who just really love the cold. You got cyclocross racers who really love it when it starts to get really below zero, below freezing, and so you get that wide range. And the big question is it physiological, is it psychological, or is it kind of cultural? And I think it's probably more of the psychological and the cultural than pure physiology. And because genetically, in terms of our capacity to respond to heat or cold, we're pretty similar, whether you're born in a hot environment or born in a cold environment and grow up there. But I think so much of it is cultural. I mean, if you are kind of I was born in Hong Kong, so if I'd grown up there my whole life in a kind of a Southeast Asian tropical type climate, and I suddenly, the first few years in Canada, I was young at the time, but I'm sure I felt it was ridiculous. Whereas now it's not as much of a stress. So I think a lot of it is cultural, and it's really hard to do those kind of cross-sectional, kind of longitudinal type studies because is it a case of actual physiology, or is it because way back early days I had a really good race when it was boiling hot once, so now I think, oh, I'm a hot weather rider, and I now kind of self-select myself to become more of a hot weather rider and try not to ride out as much in the cold. And so I think a lot of it is that kind of cultural kind of stimulus rather than any kind of ingrained physiology or genetics. I know for myself, I don't necessarily love the hot weather, but what really gets me is that part that's just above freezing, where it's a kind of a cold winter day with a gale force wind blowing and it's kind of that gray skies. That's probably my biggest Achilles heel. Whereas when it's well below freezing, like I actually don't mind it. I go and ski and do all sorts of other stuff outdoors without complaining. But it's those, I think everybody just has that built-in experience. And I think comes to that. It's that experience that makes you more of a one type of rider or another.
Is there some truth to the fact that quote unquote circulation plays a role here? Some people have better circulation, so blood stays in their extremities, in their fingers and toes if it's a really cold day more than others, and so they feel it less? Or is that a myth as well?
Oh, no, that's definitely not a myth. We know from studies of people with frostbite injuries that there are definitely racial differences, and the studies looking at kind of military and frostbite does show that particular kind of ethnic backgrounds, and particularly African Americans, and also individuals from the Caribbean, and also kind of somewhat intermediate would be Asians that have more propensity for frostbite compared to Caucasians. So there are definitely epidemiological studies showing that there are certain groups that are more at risk, and it does come down to differences in blood flow, and that's actually in the hands and the toes. And that's definitely one area of study that I kind of have done a lot in over my career, and to show that there is definitely huge individual variability in terms of blood flow. And I think that's where the discomfort really comes in, especially in the cold, is just trying to keep your hands cold or warm and your feet warm. And I know if those go, that all other bets are off. I can have the warmest core on earth, but if my hands and feet are cold, then I don't want to be outside anymore. So I think there definitely is a theme to that there are differences, and there are certain kind of physical syndromes such as Raynaud's syndrome, where people have really, really strong, almost aversive response and vasoconstriction or blood flow reduction in cold to the point that it's intensely painful in addition to just being cold. So there is certainly differences across people. And so, yes, there are different shades, but I think in general, I don't think we kind of start our cycling careers as a cold weather rider or a hot weather. I think a lot of it does become experience and self-selection after a while.
Yeah, right.
One thing that I remember you had in your book that I found really fascinating that I didn't know was, I mean, we all know that when you get into cold weather, your body's trying to preserve heat, so it's going to shut off blood flow to your extremities, and that's why your hands and feet get cold. But as I remember, this isn't true for everybody, but for some people, that actually cycles. So you'll shut off blood flow to your extremities for maybe 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and then your body will actually let some blood flow go to the extremities to warm them up for a bit for 5-10 minutes, and then go back to shutting down blood flow.
Yeah, that process is called cold-induced vasodilation, and it's you can really look at it if you think about kind of the body as an engineering design that when you first get cold, again, you want to preserve the heat in your torso and in your head and your center of your body. So the body is basically saying, well, I can live without blood flow in my hands. I can live without my fingers in my hands. I can't live without my lungs and heart and brain. So that's where I'm going to prioritize the blood. But it's almost as if the body can be hedging its bet, saying, well, I can live without my fingers, but I don't really want to. So every so often,
Yes,
right. I'm going to, give my fingers a little bit of blood just to try to maintain, kind of prolong the time before it does become damaged from frostbite. So that's kind of the teleological kind of engineering design perspective. But, again, a lot of the research, including a lot of work in my lab, is trying to see, how does that actually happen? What are the mechanisms actually controlling that finger blood flow in the cold? But yeah, it's, I think we've all had that experience that we go out on a ride where, we maybe didn't wear kind of the right amount of gloves in terms of coverage. And then, it's cold to start with, but as you start exercising, you get warm, you kind of feel this almost like cyclical blood flow in your hands. You suddenly, after about 10 minutes or so, it starts feeling warm again, and then maybe it gets cool, then it feels warm again. And that's kind of that cyclic vasodilation going on in your fingers.
So this is another one that you sent us. So just to give our listeners some background, we said we wanted to do the myths. So I emailed you and said, send us the myths that you'd really like to cover. And one that I love, and you sent this, is there is no bad weather, just bad clothing equipment. And before you answer that, I'm going to say I always do my homework for these episodes, and here's my commitment. A week ago, I was up at 9,000 feet. It was 36 degrees Fahrenheit, about 2 degrees Celsius, and it started pouring rain on me. And I had to descend for 30 minutes. I am going to make the argument that was pretty crappy weather. It was not fun.
There's no such thing as bad weather. There's just Trevor's bad decisions.
That too.
Well, I really sent that question to you, Trevor, so you can get back on your cold weather soapbox from your episode 35. So I was anticipating I can just shut up and you can just be talking for an hour again. But
let's recap that. Let's not have you go on for an hour.
My recap is it drives me nuts, the number of people who underdress.
Yeah, for sure. It's, I know this past weekend up here in Ontario was the first warm kind of real weekend day. And that was nice and warm. And it was the first ride I did without arm warmers or knee warmers. And this is now early May, whereas even in late April when it was not that far above freezing, I was seeing people in shorts and cycling and go like, oh my God, no. Yeah. But I really don't think there's an excuse to be kind of barring catastrophe like what you just had, Trevor. But most of the time there's just no reason to be kind of ill-equipped for weather. We have gotten so much better in terms of clothing design nowadays, whether it's more waterproof yet kind of really really good fitting clothing to having gear on our bike, much better fenders and things like that, most of the time you can be protected a lot more from cold. So I think we have expanded our ability to really tolerate cold weather, and not so much hot weather, but certainly I think we're more talking about cold weather here. And, we just have so much nicer equipment than, when I started riding in the 80s, where there was no specialized cycling clothing. It was, like a big kind of garbage bag type of rain jacket, those kind of things. So yeah, I think people really need to learn how to dress properly for cycling, and I would agree with you, Trevor. It's you almost never go wrong with wearing a bit more clothing than what you think you need, rather than too little, and always have backup if you can. Most of the time, unless it's really, really middle of summer, I'll still have, a lightweight vest stuffed in my jersey pocket just in case of, it's suddenly getting cold or anything like that. So I think there is definitely cases of bad weather, but I think a lot of it comes down to our poor management of our gear and our clothing choices.
And particularly if you do layers, you can always take layers off, but you have to have them first.
Yep.
And what I always tell athletes is, because whenever I tell people, you need to dress more, I always get but what happens if I'm overdressed? What happens if I overheat a little? And my response is always, if you are overdressed, you're a little uncomfortable. If you are underdressed, you are doing damage.
Yeah, absolutely. It's I think that's a good philosophy to have, and I think we'll talk about later on about whether things like embrocation and stuff actually works. Is it physiological, or is it really just kind of making your skin tingle? And you are definitely at much greater risk in the cold with your joints, with just aggravating little things that in a normal temperature or when you're warm wouldn't aggravate you, but those things just add up when you're cold. And go start your car in the middle of winter, it's not overly happy. So that's like your body and before it really gets warmed up, or if you're underdressed, that's exactly the same thing that's going on.
Your joints, yep.
Yeah.
And I agree with you completely about the equipment. I have always been somebody who's dumb enough to go out and ride when it's negative 20 degrees. And I don't need to say Celsius or Fahrenheit, because I think that's the point where they're the same.
They're the same. It's cold.
It's cold. Really cold. And I can tell you 15, 20 years ago, it was miserable. Mm-hmm. Now I have the battery-operated heated socks, heated gloves, heated jersey.
Gadget guy over here.
And you have nice face covering. You have better clothing. You can go out in that weather and actually be quite comfortable.
Yeah, well, this winter, and I can't believe as a thermal physiologist and as a cyclist for 35 years, it's taken me this long. I finally invested in a good quality battery-operated insoles, and I got a set of bar mitts for my bike, and it's like, oh, why didn't I do this before?
I know.
What took me 20 plus years to do this?
I just did the bar mitts this year, and you could go out riding below. Chris is laughing pretty hard at us here.
I'm laughing at these two Canadians talking about their bar mitts.
Bar mitts are great. Like, I've gone out when it's below freezing and I don't need gloves on.
Yeah, no, I don't discount their effectiveness. It's just funny to hear you guys talk about it. That's all. I tend to reach a point where I think the wind chill of riding around on my bike when it's negative 20 is, I'd rather do something else, right? So, yeah, that's all.
Yep. Since we're talking about the Canadian thing, I will actually back what you were saying, that it's more cultural, because I will tell you, growing up in Canada, I hated the cold. I didn't enjoy skiing. I loved it when our family went down to Florida in the middle of the winter and it was warm. Mm-hmm. It wasn't until I moved to the U.S. and everybody started making fun of me for being Canadian that I went, well, I've got to play up to stereotypes, and now I have to like the cold. And at first it was an act. And then at a certain point I went, wow, I don't mind the cold anymore.
Yeah, you can totally convince yourself. Well, not everybody, but you can certainly try to convince yourself. Some people can do a good job of it. Some people might not be able to do as good a job of it. But if you just embrace those things, whether it's cold, whether it's heat, whether it's wind, there is a complete component that is psychological there. And it's not unlike the quote hard man moniker or label that gets placed on people from Belgium because they like to ride in the rain, in the nasty weather, in the spring classics, etc. You embrace that, it becomes a routine and so forth, and that can help. That can certainly help.
It's also proving Mike Meyer's point that there is nothing more Canadian than a Canadian living in the U.S. We sat down with former professional triathlete Whitney Garcia, who has raced in the heat of Kona on several occasions, as well as many other Ironman events in hot environments. We actually originally asked her for her tips about racing in the heat and the cold, but she was quick to point out that if there's such a thing as a hot weather rider or a cold weather rider, she likes the heat.
As someone who raced in Kona, which is traditionally can get pretty warm.
Yeah.
What were your strategies for dealing with the heat in a race that got that hot and you were out there for so long?
One strategy was mentally reminding myself that I was very durable, because I would way rather, hands down, race in a hot race than a cold race. That's again a tendency. I hate being cold. It affects me mentally to be cold. And hot, it's uncomfortable, but I can totally deal with it. So I would even pick races that would be hotter, definitely, versus colder races, knowing that it could be a strength of mine, because mentally I was like, I can out sweat a lot of people that are going to melt, because heat is a real detriment to some athletes who are excellent athletes.
You thrive on challenge.
Yeah, but I won't. But don't challenge me with a cold race, because
only certain challenges.
I don't know.
It's very specific challenges.
Generally, yes, I thrive on challenge, but there are some things like, cold isn't a good challenge for me.
So were there any things that you did in terms of dealing with the heat on the day?
Being well hydrated is huge,
yeah.
And so that's a reason why I still carry a water bottle everywhere I go, even when I'm not training.
It's a habit.
It's a total habit to stay hydrated.
Was it as simple as just carrying around a water bottle, or did you use pre-hydration mixes? Did you use ice drinks
during the race,
or beforehand?
Beforehand, yes. I mean, your hydration for a big race like that and a hot race like that starts before the day of the race. So you just don't let yourself get dehydrated. You are walking around with a water bottle, and I didn't really need to be consuming ice, but at that point, I mean, ice is during the race to keep your core temperature down. But hydration, and then yes, there's lots of different mixes of things to keep your sodium levels and what other levels.
Did you ever use them?
Yeah, and those were usually recommended by my coach, because I didn't get really deep into the nutrition of things, but there were certain things that were helpful. I mean, just straight water for a race you're going to sweat and lose a lot of salt in. Oh, salt tablets as well. I didn't even know about that at all before my coach. To take tablets of salt and potassium and there's good combinations of electrolytes, and so that also became part of the nutrition of the race. And sometimes, like for Kona and for some other hot and humid races, you would start taking those the day before. You just extra salt your food.
You're banking it, basically.
You're saturating your body with water absorbing capabilities as best you can. I don't know how good that is for blood pressure.
That is a different conversation.
Yeah, who said triathlons were good for you?
That's
really?
Right. Nothing reasonable. Then during the race, ice is key, and so are, like in Kona, they have sponges. And that the aid stations will have soaked cold water sponges, and so you put them on the back of your neck. There are some key places. Keep your head and your neck cooler, because you release a lot of heat from your head. So
I got that must be both physically and very mentally beneficial.
The cold sponges and ice,
definitely.
I mean, every aid station, it's like a mile usually they're per mile, like Kona they were, and it's like you just knock it down 1/8
It's just
at a time.
that
It's like,
countdown.
where's my sponge? It's 1 mile away. Where's my ice pack?
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
but if you put them under your under your arms, you stick them like in your jersey. So you stick especially
Yeah.
sponges because they can be stuck places.
Yeah.
So really, the points that are going to help stay cool is your neck, your head, like stick it under your hat. Under your armpits or near that, and your groin. So you'd see people like with sponges. The other thing about Ironman is so not glamorous. Like on the whole, it's like, what a cool sport. It's so hardcore. But like the nitty gritty is so disgusting.
Yeah, people probably pooping and peeing all over themselves, shoving things in weird places. Who knows what they're doing out there in Kona?
No comment.
No comment. That means yes.
In cycling, the version is ice stockings, which is you get women's nylons, you put ice in them, and then you put them down the back of your shirt.
Oh,
Yeah.
I never saw that.
And so that's really big. And I was managing a team, and we were at Joe Martin in Arkansas, and we also had red bikes. And the quickest way to repair paint damage is just by nail polish. So I'm in the middle of Arkansas at this grocery store buying a box of pantyhose and
red nail
fingernail polish. And the person at the checkout counter looks at this, then looks over, sees my shaved legs, and is just like,
Interesting. That's a good story.
That is a good story.
You're lucky you walked out of that grocery store. No offense to people in Arkansas.
I saw the look on her face, and I was about to explain that. I'm just like, that's fine. I'm not even going to try.
Yeah. Perhaps we should flip the tables around and talk about something that the Canadians don't know all that much about, which is heat.
Okay.
And some myths about the heat. Should we go there?
Let's go there. We got a big
Sure,
list.
why not?
All right. First big myth about, or question about heat. Can we adapt to heat, Dr. Cheung?
Absolutely. It's probably the best thing you can do to get ready for competing in the heat is to become physiologically well adapted. And the body's capacity is immense in this field. And I know you've gone over in previous episodes, but just to recap, the big things that happen to your body is that you thermoregulate better. Your heart rate becomes generally lower at any particular wattage. And also you sweat a lot more. You sweat earlier, and you are much more sensitive in the sweating response. So for a given hour, you might go from, say, sweating out half a liter at this exercise to almost 1 liter. You can double the amount of sweat that you can produce. So there's an immense capacity there. And one of the big tricks is, what's the best way to do it? And should you do it by exercising in the heat, or can I just go sit in a sauna for an hour a day? And the best thing to do from both kind of a physiological perspective and also from a time efficiency is to train in the heat, is to find some way to get your body hotter than normal. And the easiest way to do that is through exercise. If you are gradually adapting yourself in the heat, it might take about a week and a half to maybe 2 weeks to become really well adapted. And that's one thing you can do if you are, say, a triathlete and getting ready for Kona in November or late October, November, but it's already cool in the place that you're training in. Well, what can you do? You can go indoors and be on a stationary bike and maybe have less fans than normal, because then you're going to become, your body's going to become hotter. The other thing you can do is you can wear a lot more clothing and trap more heat in your body as you are riding. So there's a lot of kind of both low tech ways you can do to heat adapt and also higher tech ways. So you can certainly go and use my environmental chamber in my lab and exercise for a prolonged period of time every day, 60 to 90 minutes a day for 2 weeks. You can go to a hot environment early and for 2 weeks beforehand to become gradually adapted. So there's a wide range of things that you can do, but the end result is you're going to be better. You're going to have a little bit more blood and plasma volume, so you can distribute that blood. You have more blood to distribute, and your body is also better at distributing it and also getting rid of heat through sweating. So those are the big things. And does it actually work? Which is the brass tacks thing. Besides the physiology, absolutely. In a meta-analysis that I co-authored in 2016, we looked at about 96 different studies from the 50s up to the present day, and we found about 48 studies that were actually had a performance test over heat adaptation before and afterwards, and we found that 46 of them had a significant improvement. The mean was about 8% improvement through to ranging up to about 20% improvement in terms of performance, in terms of exercising in the heat. So absolutely, that's one of the best things you can do. And whether you are an athlete or whether you're a worker that's going to be kind of knowing that you're going to be working in a hot environment, is to get your body adapted to it.
When you say gradual over a week and a half to 2 weeks, what does gradual mean? Is that a 5-degree temperature increase each time, or is that a 1-degree temperature increase each time? Or is it a length of time?
It's more a length of time. The main thing, I mean, your body doesn't really, in a sense, know whether you are becoming hot because you're exercising or because you're sitting in a sauna. Honestly, all it knows is that it's hot and that you better, become better able to deal with it. So the main thing you want to do is to raise your body temperature about 1.5 degrees or so, as a general rule of thumb, for about 60 to 90 minutes a day for about 2 weeks to get kind of an optimal level of adaptation. So, for example, if you are going to a warm environment and you're going 2 weeks ahead, what that means is that you should, knowing the first few days, you're not going to be able to ride as long or as hard as possible, and get yourself adapted to it. It's the same thing as with altitude. You're not going to go to an altitude camp and immediately start going into full race prep and race type intervals or endurance. You're going to gradually adapt to it. And, but by the time, after about 2 weeks in general, the studies show that your performance can reach about the same level as as if you were in a cooler environment, after about 2 weeks in the heat. So I think that's the next question we're going to talk about, is that, okay, we see all these improvements over time, both physiology and performance, after, let's say, 2 weeks in the heat. Does that become a benefit if I'm going to go back and my main race is actually in the cool environment? So should I actually heat adapt as an ergogenic aid for a competition in the cold? And the analogy is, that's exactly why athletes use altitude training. They're not necessarily competing up at high altitude, but they're competing back in sea level. They're using altitude to have all these physiological changes that is going to make them better when they compete at sea level. So does that hold for heat? And the scientific kind of consensus is really equivocal right now. There are some very well done studies that show that if you become heat adapted, and these were in trained individuals, after 2 weeks, and then you went and competed, did a time trial in a normal kind of cooler environment, some studies show that you do have an improvement, and you can actually perform better after this period of heat adaptation, even if you're competing in a cooler environment. And then there are other studies that don't show it. So kind of the scientific evidence is almost split right down the middle right now. But I guess my personal take on it is, yes, the performance benefits, it's kind of a 50-50 right now in terms of where science think it is. But the main thing is for the large part, there is no harm in being heat adapted. It's not as if you are not going to be able to compete as well if you are heat adapted. So at worst case, it is going to be neutral to your performance. At best case, it's going to improve your performance in a cooler environment. So if you can do it, if you can integrate it into your yearly training plan, and then I would say, why not? Why wouldn't you? Because again, at worst, it's not going to help you. At best, it is going to help you. And so I know when I've been advising different Olympic athletes, and even if they're not competing in the cold, we've been working with their sports science team to really integrate kind of heat adaptation, on the chance that it is going to have an improvement. And again, worst case, it's not going to harm them. So as long as it doesn't cost them extra recovery time, it doesn't impair their kind of training capacity, then it's kind of a good thing to have in your quiver just in case it does work.
So the only thing I'll bring up to all of this is just also remember that heat exhaustion is heat exhaustion. Do be careful with all these different things. Don't think, oh, I'm going to a hot event in the heat. I need to heat adapt. So what I'm going to do is go into my apartment or home or bedroom or whatever, close all the windows, jack the heat up to 95 degrees and do a 6-hour ride on the trainer, and that's going to get me ready.
Right.
That can fatigue you. That can heat stress you. So as you said, you want to build up to this. And the example I actually think is back to 2008, they were really concerned about the China Olympics because of how hot it was going to be. And they did exactly that. They took a lot of the hopefuls and had them do a 5-day I think it was a 5-day training camp where they were doing 6 hours a day, and they put them inside a heated trailer and had them ride on the trainer for 5-6 hours a day. Is this the Canadian
national team, you're saying?
This is some of the hopeful riders.
Oh, okay,
and, I know some of them who were in this and just said that was just about the most miserable experience of my life. It practically burned me out.
Yeah. Not the best method.
I mean, anything comes down to elite athletics. There's so many different priorities at play, and heat adaptation isn't the only thing that you're concerned with. There's so many other things, so you have to very carefully integrate into it. And the worst thing to do is, I heard this podcast saying I should be heat adapted, and do exactly what you just said, Trevor. And you really need to ease into it. You need to have a long-term view of what is happening, and you need to kind of gradually build up to it rather than just immediately jumping in with both feet, so to speak.
Yeah. In terms of overdoing it, that brings up the next question in a way. Do we shut down if our body temperature gets too high? Is there some protection built into our physiology?
So, and before you answer this, I have remembered reading that there is a temperature where literally our bodies just shut down. And as a matter of fact, there's this older study that I'm looking at right now in the Journal of Physiology from 1993, where they said basically all the athletes they tested, as soon as their core temperature hit 39.7, they all shut down.
Yeah, that was a classic study by Bodil Nielsen in 93 from Copenhagen. And that was actually also some work that I followed up with for my PhD in Toronto at the military lab, where we found the same thing. We found that individuals, whether they were heat adapted or not, whether they were well hydrated or dehydrated, they seem to have a very consistent temperature at which they voluntarily stopped exercising. We asked them to keep walking. They were wearing chemical warfare clothing with the Canadian Forces until they just weren't willing to do it anymore. And we found, regardless of hydration or acclimation status, there was a very consistent core temperature. And this led to my paper in 98, and that between those two papers really instigated this whole idea that there was a critical internal temperature at which our body shuts down. And there's been a lot of controversy about it since, and we can talk about it a little bit coming up. But the main thing is, do we shut down if our body temperature gets too high? Absolutely. You can't fool kind of physiology in a sense. At a certain temperature, your proteins are in your cells are just going to start breaking down. It is what happens when you cook an egg, right? The protein changes shape and changes form. So the proteins in your body are no different. They're optimized for working within a very narrow range of temperatures. And if it gets too high, and again, I'm using Celsius here because I'm Canadian. So, between 41 and 42 degrees Celsius, that protein starts breaking down in your body. And that's where you have irreversible damage to yourself. So there is an absolute limit which you can't go beyond. Now, the body has this thing called the brain, which is designed to ideally never allow you to get to that catastrophic point. So that's where you start sensing, I'm really uncomfortable. I feel really hot. And, I'm not really having that much fun anymore. Maybe I'm going to slow down, or maybe I'm going to stop. So your brain is your body's best defense against kind of your physiology, or you taking yourself to that catastrophic limit. So that's where in the early 2000s, as a response to this kind of critical internal temperature model, Tim Noakes in South Africa came up with this central governor idea of really where it's your brain that is controlling your body and how hard it is willing to exercise. So the analogy I personally like to use, it's kind of your temperature system is kind of like a gas gauge, like your gas tank. Eventually you're going to run out of gas, right? But before that happens, you start seeing this yellow warning light on your dashboard. And where your brain comes in is really the comfort level at which you feel about driving with your yellow gas gauge light on. Some people will immediately say, no, this is the end of the world. I need to find the next gas station now. Whereas other people will think, no, I mean, it's still good. I can still keep driving for another, 30 minutes or whatever. It's no big deal. And so that's where your brain really comes in. Your brain is trying to protect you ultimately from running out of gas, but it's trying to tell you in terms of temperature, in terms of your kind of substrate availability, how much kind of glucose and glycogen you have left in your body, how hard you're breathing. All of these are signals telling your body how close are you to this catastrophic limit and how hard are you willing to kind of edge up to that line without going over. So, long answer to your question is that yes, there is an absolute physical limit that you cannot go beyond. But most of the time we're well below that limit because our brain is telling us, telling us to slow down, telling us to take a break, take a drink of water, whatever, all of these things to try to protect ourselves. And the best defense is the brain telling us, let's slow down a bit.
So it's good to hear how the brain's supposed to work, because when that yellow light goes on, that's when my brain's like, ooh, we're having fun now.
Captain of bad decisions.
Yes. What's your feeling about this 2019 study looking at the 2016 UCI World Championships, where they showed two of the women on the winning TTT team hit 41.5?
Yeah, it actually doesn't really surprise me, because even back in 2006, there was a nice study done looking at half marathon in Singapore, where they're tracking their core temperature throughout the race. I think they had about 18 kind of well-trained runners, and they found that in these runners, and it took them about an hour and a half to 2 hours to finish. It was obviously Singapore, very warm, very humid, where it's really challenging to thermoregulate. And within 30 minutes, most of them had their core temperature above 40 degrees Celsius. Where in the lab, I would have had to stop them because of ethics.
Right.
And they were able to keep running at that high core temperature for the remaining hour to hour and a half, and quite able and willing to tolerate that. So I think there's a big benefit to being heat adapted in these individuals and also physically fit. And I think one of the other things that you do in terms of heat adaptation isn't just the physiology, is again, the perception, is that you become used to being uncomfortable when you are exercising, when there's sweat dripping down off your face everywhere, when you feel like you're boiling on the inside, and your body becomes habituated, becomes sensitized to that feeling, and it's not as uncomfortable anymore. And was a really nice study, again, came out of my PhD lab in 2002, where they looked at fit individuals doing that walk to exhaustion with chemical warfare clothing compared to unfit individuals. And the unfit individuals had a really kind of close matching between their physiological strain and their perceived strain, how hard they felt things were, how uncomfortable was the heat and everything. Whereas the highly fit individuals, they physiologically were just as stressed, but perceptually, they didn't feel nearly as stressed at all. So there was a big disconnect between that. So I think one of the things fitness, being fit and being adapted does is a mental thing. It just gets you used to that discomfort. And I would argue, even just forget temperature, just one of the things we do when we train isn't just to benefit our physiology, is to get used to riding hard, and that feeling of your legs burning, that feeling of your breathing super rapidly, all of that. I mean, it's a huge psychological thing in addition to physiology.
So to go with your analogy of the light, the yellow light's coming on about the same time for everybody, but what you're saying is, in a very fit individual, they have a much better ability to just go, yeah, I'm going to ignore that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's where I think is going. I think at the same time, there's no difference in terms of a untrained or a trained individual. It's not as their proteins will break down. One will break down at 40 degrees, another will at 43. It's simple thermodynamics, physics that's going to break down that protein. But again, it is how close are you willing to push it. And that's what I found in my 98 study too, is that I also had a low fit group and also a high fit group. And I found the low fit group stopped exercising at about 0.7 degree Celsius lower core temperature than the highly fit group. So, I really think there is something to that. Being fit and being kind of adapted just allows you to, mentally push harder or longer through a wall of discomfort.
It also sounds like you're saying you're dealing with literally denaturing of proteins. There is a certain temperature where no amount of training, no amount of willpower is going to be able to get you past the fact that your body is not going to be able to function.
Yeah, absolutely. It's you are eventually going to succumb. It's again your brain telling you how close am I willing to kind of step to that line, and I guess that goes to the other challenge, is that if you are really fit, if you are edging very close to that line, it becomes a tightrope act, and that's where the really trained elite athletes can become at risk of heat exhaustion because they're willing to push themselves so close to the edge. So now if you have kind of interventions such as you have a runner or a cyclist who's fit and already very hot in core temperature, but they pour cold water over their heads, and suddenly they feel, oh, I'm good again. My skin feels cool, so now I can go harder again. I don't have to worry about that yellow light. That's where you run into the real problems of heat exhaustion and heat collapse, are those individuals that are already very, very close to running out of gas, in that gas tank analogy.
So should we move on to the next one? I want to introduce this one because you and I were at a Grand Fondo in 2018 and you laughed at me for this. So I want to ask the question.
Absolutely, go for it.
Actually, two questions here. So when you're racing or training in the heat, A, does pouring water over your head actually work? And B, does having a smoothie or some crushed ice before the race help?
Yeah, well, are you sure I wasn't just laughing at you in general, Trevor? But,
Probably. You're just,
nice.
Just
I like
good,
it.
good excuse.
come on, it's not only Americans laughing at Canadians. Canadians are allowed to make fun of Trevor too.
That's true.
But,
Look, we make fun of ourselves.
Yes, you often do that, and then you apologize about it.
Yes,
Yeah,
we do, and that's the worst part.
But I'm probably giving away a classic question of mine that I like to ask PhD students at their comprehensive exams, which is, if you are, doing this long bout of exercise, whether it's a ride or a run, do you pour the water over your head at an aid station or do you drink it? And I always find that an intriguing question. I think both work for different reasons, and pouring water over your head definitely does work, because assuming it's relatively cool water, that it's not tea that you're pouring over your head. But the main thing that does is that it for a short period of time, it cools off your skin. And we also know that in terms of perceived effort, perceived discomfort, your facial and neck and head skin temperature has a really disproportionate impact compared to, say, pouring that water over your torso. So if I had, one bottle of water and I was told to pour it, where would I pour it on my body? I would pour it kind of gradually over my head and my face, because perceptually it is going to make the most impact. And because there's so many more kind of thermal sensors in our face and our head than there is, again, on our torso and our arms or our legs. And so that's where I would pour it. And
it seems like that's an instinctual thing too. It's not like anybody 50 years ago maybe knew this, but you always saw people pouring water on their heads and faces. So
yeah, and just like a runner at an aid station, you got those cool sponges. Where are you going to do it? You're not going to rub it all over your leg. You're going to pour it over your neck. If you have a running cap on, you're probably going to put it under your cap even, right, so that you have a continual stream of water. And it's just like with the ice socks that you see some pros handing out in the cars and sticking it down their back. That's the next best thing to having it right around your neck and the head to really target the core. I don't think those interventions are really cooling you down in terms of really having a thermal effect, but it is a huge perceptual benefit in terms of what you get out of it. But again, the risk becomes if you are already on the edge of heat exhaustion, you're very, very high in core temperature, and now you suddenly feel transiently better and you're going to keep pushing yourself hard. That's where you can push yourself over the edge. But, assuming you're still, far away from that critical catastrophic limit, then it is a good thing because it's going to make you feel better. Now, the other thing is just remember that if you are sweating, if it is the other benefit of pouring water over your head or over the rest of your body is that you now have a wet skin that can essentially act as sweat on your body. If it evaporates and dissipates heat from your body, that's also going to be an added benefit. So that's why, again, the other benefit, the physiological benefit for pouring water over your head or over your body is really, it's kind of like free sweat. It's instead of taking it out of your body, you are now putting kind of water all over your skin and allowing it to get rid of heat that way.
So I wish I had my old environmental extremes professor, Dr. Gottschall from Colorado State University here, because in our class, he told us, do not ever pour water over your body. And his reasoning was, if you pour cold water over your body, it causes vasoconstriction, which prevents blood from getting to the surface and releasing heat from your core. So it will actually heat up your core.
Yeah, no, that's also absolutely true. So if you had really ice cold water, that's not what I would do with it. I would, have kind of coolish water, but you're really walking that fine line. Ideally, you want to have your skin cool, but not so cold that you start vasoconstriction. So it's a constant game that that you are playing. So again, I wouldn't pour necessarily ice water over myself because yes, you're going to start vasoconstricting, but I would pour kind of coolish or kind of not necessarily the super cold water coming out of the tap, but kind of that medium type water, just to really lower your skin temperature a little bit, give you that perceptual benefit, and also to have more water on your body that you can dissipate and evaporate for heat loss.
Okay. So what about slushies, crushed ice, that sort of thing before an event?
Right. So that's kind of the other half of the question that I ask PhD students is, do you pour it over your head or do you drink it? So I guess before we talk about before the race, let's talk about if you have that water bottle at an aid station, again, do you drink it or do you pour it over your body? And the rationale for drinking it is, especially if it's colder, then it can kind of cool your body down a little bit, especially if it's a crushed ice, and also that it's going to replace your blood volume that you are losing through sweating. So that would be the rationale for drinking and staying hydrated, is that you are maintaining your plasma and your blood volume. So now, what is the rationale for slushies? Well, slushies is kind of ice in addition to water. So for a given volume, you can lose a lot more heat, or it can take in a lot more heat because you have to turn that ice into liquid. So that melting of water from freezing, but it's solid ice, to freezing, but it's water, that already sucks up a huge amount of energy. And then to heat up that water, once it's melted, takes more energy. So that's why there's a benefit to taking slushies compared to, just cold water, is that you get much more for a given volume that you drink or eat. With slushies, you can suck off a lot more heat from your body that way. But yes, they have been used for pre-cooling before quite successfully. And also there are certainly some kind of bottles that are specifically meant to, almost have slushies in them that you can have on your bike and that you can kind of ingest as you are riding. And those certainly can be very effective because they have a huge capacity to take away heat from your body.
Yeah, so I'm actually looking at that 2013 study by Burden, where they did the ice slushies and looked at the effect. And basically they said pretty much what you're saying, that it creates this huge heat sink in your gut that can help keep you cool and help performance.
Yeah, I know my students have been kind of lobbying for a slushy machine in the lab for at least the last few years now, and they claim it's for science.
Yeah,
sure.
This is making me think back to my days as a kid when we would get something called a suicide slush, where we'd go to the slush puppy stand. Is this a thing in your world? And we would ask them to put all of the flavors in at one time. The squirt bottle things that was probably just
probably
cancerous
just
red.
disgusting.
Yeah, no, it just kind of had that general sugar taste.
I was going to say.
Yeah. So, anyways, I think you should get that for the students. They would appreciate it.
I really can't believe 7-Eleven hasn't marketed Slurpees much more aggressively as a cooling aid.
I'm missing out.
Lie to you, on the really hot days when I'm out for a long ride and I'm struggling, I will go to a 7-Eleven and pick one of those up. They
Absolutely.
help.
Yeah, no, I mean there's a lot of sugar in there, and there's also ice. So yeah, why not?
We caught up with Nick Legan, Shimano's road brand manager and former tech editor at VeloNews. Nick has had years of racing in extreme conditions, both hot and cold weather, and often for long periods of time. Nick shared with us a whole wealth of knowledge about how to deal with the heat.
So, Nick, you've been in a lot of hot races before, some that have been over really extended periods of time. Yeah. And I know you're a thinker and you're a tinkerer. So I'm curious. I'm curious. What innovations or methods have you devised to manage heat better under those conditions?
Yeah. First and foremost, you have to spend time, ideally, in those conditions. And that's why you hear about elite athletes training in saunas, things like that. I don't have a sauna at my house, but I will say keep an extra layer on that normally I would take off to be a little more comfortable. So anytime you can be specific in your training, specificity,
Mimic the
absolutely.
conditions that you're going to face.
Specificity pays off. And of course, you also have to, you can't just go wear an extra jersey and not drink more. You have to adjust holistically to those conditions. I think that's always helpful. So waiting until midday to go do your ride if you're expecting to be racing or performing in those conditions can be helpful, as opposed to seeking out that early morning or evening cooler temps. Ice. Anytime you can get your hands on some ice, make sure you're grabbing it. What
do you do with that ice?
Self-supported events, I actually pre-cut stockings to make ice socks. So
put those down the back of your jersey.
Exactly. So I'll have some of them in my hydration pack or a frame bag or a pocket. And when I get to a convenience store, I'll either buy a bag of ice or go to the soda machine and fill up one, knot it, and put it in the back of my jersey. If you're
tell me how refreshing that feels.
It's unbelievable.
I knew I was going to get that response.
It's kind of shocking. It can be actually shocking.
Yeah.
We've all had that taking our breath away if you jump into some cold water. But that ice sock can do amazing things. If you got to be a little careful, because you are also making yourself wet, which is good from an evaporative cooling perspective. But if it's a really long race, wet plus chamois plus saddle is not always the best combo.
Yeah. You have to balance those things.
It can be tricky. I know people that have filled, I've actually, in a pinch, I've used a cycling cap and I filled it with ice and just put it down my jersey.
Yep.
So just, a handful, honestly, just down your jersey is going to help. If it's a really long day, covering up. Sunburn, one thing I tell all my athletes and that I've been told over the years, and I wholeheartedly take it on board, sunburn is for amateurs. If you're out there and you feel yourself getting crispy, address it. Stop. Put on sunscreen. Cover up, sun sleeves. I wear, when it's hot, it's counterintuitive, but I'll wear a buff. I'll cover my ears. I mean, and we're talking some ultra events where you're out there for hours and hours and hours.
Yes.
If you're racing the crit and it's really hot, you probably don't want to race around in a buff.
That would be funny.
It would be, you look interesting. But yeah, there are lots of ways to deal with heat. I think, honestly, you can also, the power of the mind is incredible. And trying not to focus on it or trying to just think, I've seen people really, melt when they have a hot day and a headwind. But the truth of it is that headwind is actually cooling you with through the power of evaporative cooling. So embrace that headwind and take it on board and recognize that it's actually a friend right now. And it's actually going to hurt you more when you have a tailwind. You're going to be even hotter.
Yeah.
So any little kind of mental trick, visualization can be really helpful as well. Visualize something more comfortable, something cooler. Yeah, there are lots of things you can do there.
And what about equipment? Are there things that you can do to improve your experience when it comes to your equipment in super hot conditions?
One great example is insulated water bottles that will keep it cooler at least a little bit longer. If it's 100 plus degrees Fahrenheit, those are they're still going to warm. But, using something like that can be helpful. Absolutely. A helmet that's ventilated. Maybe that's the day you don't wear the aero lid,
Right.
Really lightweight jerseys. Get rid of the base layer, things like that. Again, this comes down to priorities. But if we're looking at optimal performance in these conditions, performance is not really often directly correlated with comfort. So it might be less comfortable. Some people love a base layer because it's comfortable. It keeps seams away from their body, et cetera. But if you really want to go fast in those conditions, it's not about comfort anymore. It's about going fast. So get rid of the base layer. Thinner socks, a shoe that has more, drill holes in your shoe. Get some ventilation. Pour some water down there.
I know when your wife raced Dirty Kansas one year, you even planned ahead to have different helmet for her, and some other things so Dirty Kansas, you start and the temperatures are cool, and it's not, the sun hasn't even risen, high in the sky yet. So you can get away with an aerodynamic helmet, some aerodynamic equipment that would be hot if it was in the middle of the day. Yeah. And then you get to the aid station and you switch out into some gear that allows you to cool off more. So you thinking ahead like that for some of these ultra events is also part of the game.
Absolutely. I mean, I wouldn't say we went overboard because it paid off. She had a great result. She podiumed. She started in an aero helmet. She rode midday in a ventilated helmet, and then she switched to actually a third helmet that had her light pre-installed. Wow. So that in case something went sideways, she didn't even have to fumble with her light. Yep. We did different pre-packed hydration packs. Except that for the hottest part of the day, she didn't wear a hydration pack because she could just cool a little bit better. Exactly. And she had a really good plan on, I'm going to hydrate and eat early while my gut still works, so that if it gets hot and I can't get those calories on board, I'll be okay. And I can maybe make it up a little later in the day when it cools off. So absolutely thinking about it, again, holistically, what's the entire experience going to be like, and where can I get the things in that I need when my body's ready to take them on board is helpful. In terms of other equipment, we could talk about chain lube, things like that, but some of that's just going to come down to experimentation.
Yeah, right. Cool.
Let's get back to our myths about heat.
Next on the list is sweat. So, if sweat drips off of us, is it losing its power to work for us? Do wicking undershirts really work? So that's a two-part question for you, Dr. Cheung.
Yeah. So first off, sweat dripping off you absolutely does not help at all. All it does is getting you dehydrated faster. So you may be riding indoors if you're kind of stuck indoors and you see this big, massive pile of sweat and say, oh, that was a great workout. Well, no, it means you were probably overheating, because all of that sweat on the floor hasn't done a bit to help you actually lose heat. So no, you don't want to be toweling off sweat. You don't want to be kind of having it drip off of you. That doesn't help at all. Now, what does a wicking undershirt do? The wicking undershirt moves the water away from your skin a little bit, and then and the main benefit of that is comfort, because having a really wet skin feels really uncomfortable. So the main purpose of a wicking undershirt is to move the water just that little bit above your skin into the base layer itself, and then you are still having that wet undershirt and it is still evaporating as sweat, but the main benefit is that it is making you a little bit more comfortable than if that sweat was just all over your body.
So we haven't mentioned this yet, and it's probably worth mentioning for anybody who's asking. When you're talking about sweat and the benefits to cooling you down, it's not the production of the sweat itself. It's you get the sweat on the surface of your skin, and then heat is dissipated by evaporating that fluid. So if there's no evaporation, there's no benefit.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the only purpose for the sweat is if your body then heats it up and turns it from liquid into water vapor, and that sucks away a lot of heat. So if it drips on the floor, well, obviously it is not taking heat away from your body.
Yeah, it's lost its opportunity to do the job it was intended to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think I've told this story before, but I used to run a morning gym.
You have told this story before.
Trainer class. We had a guy there. So apologize. I feel a need to tell it again.
Please.
We had a guy that had such a huge sweat puddle.
Yuck.
Underneath him. Now, let's just say my job at the end of the class was to do the mopping.
Was he proud of this puddle?
I think so.
Yeah, I bet he was.
That moment of going at it with the mop, people talk about you have a moment in your life where you just go, what am I doing with my life?
That was your moment?
That was my moment.
And after that, what did you quit the job just right then?
Nope, I just had that moment every week.
And then Trevor just repressed his existentialist crisis and just stayed working there for another 5 years, right?
Yeah.
Pretty much. Yep.
Oh boy.
It's amazing what I can push down. Okay, so along with that, should our drink mixes match our sweat composition? And there are now drinks out there that are big on this. We will analyze your sweat and then give you a formula that has electrolyte composition similar to what you are sweating out.
Custom drink mix.
Yep.
Yeah, I think the first thing to keep in mind is that, from the early days of Gatorade, it's been talking about replacing your electrolytes as you sweat. Well, the thing to keep in mind is that every single sport drink out there, except for some of these newer ones, is still has much less electrolyte salt content than your sweat is. Because if you actually tried to mix a drink with the same salinity, same salt concentration as your sweat, it is just horrible. It is just impossible to mask with any amount of sugar or sweetener. So most of the time when we are taking in a sport electrolyte drink, it is still what we call hypotonic. It is much less salt than what you are sweating out. So don't ever think that, we are replacing all of the salt.
What about licking your arm? And
just tell me you haven't tried
recycling, so to speak.
I guess Trevor could just, instead of mopping up the floor, just collect all of that sweat in a water bottle, and there's this next drink mix.
Gosh.
I'm reconsidering my life once again.
Hey, you do put some fancy marketing on that product, you might actually get rich.
Yeah. But I guess that's the big message to raise, is that almost all of the drinks out there is still much less salty than the sweat that we are losing. So you are always going to be at a net loss of salt from your body when you are exercising. Most of the time, that's not a big deal because we have so much salt in our diet that we can easily replace it. But if you find that you are a very, very salty sweater, and a lot of the times you can just see if you are super salty, if you have at the end of a ride, you find just sweat stains or salt stains all over your clothes, that might be a sign you might want to experiment with a little bit more salt content in your drinks. But I don't think you actually need to match your sweat concentration in your drink. You want to, if you are a very salty sweater, and I know you've had an episode on cramps before, one of the potential theories, it's not definitive, is related to electrolyte loss. But for cramps, and if you are prone to it, you might want to try supplementing your drink with more than normal salt, or having a saltier type of drink, and just really trial and error, see how you feel. I always say, though, the best drink in the world is completely useless unless you're willing to drink it. So, you also have to match it with your own taste preference too, and again, try it before a competition.
You brought up a really important point, which is people are very concerned about electrolyte loss, but our bodies can actually tolerate a pretty significant electrolyte loss and still function completely normally. But what is often not brought up is the importance and the ability to absorb. So if you made a drink that's got a heavy quantity of electrolytes in it and consume that, well, your body likes to maintain what's called osmotic pressure, which is the balance between the fluid and the electrolytes in it, the concentration of the electrolytes in the fluid. So if you hit your gut with that electrolyte bomb, basically, your body's going to draw fluid out of your blood into your gut to dilute those electrolytes. So it can actually sort of dehydrate you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why you shouldn't be drinking seawater if you're stranded on a life raft, right? Yep. It's because it has so much salt in it that it's actually going to suck away the fluid in the water that's in your cells to try to dilute it.
Let's hit you with one last question, Dr. Cheung, and that is, does a mouthwash or a menthol rinse or any of these things help when it comes to dealing with the heat?
Yeah, that's been a really kind of a new and exciting area of interest, probably over the last decade or so, in terms of how does menthol work as an ergogenic aid, especially in a temperature aspect. And the first off, what is menthol? It's really kind of the active ingredient in mint, right? It's that kind of a tingly sense that you have when you have drink anything with mint in it, or have a gum with peppermint or anything like that. So the idea is that if you either spread a menthol kind of gel or ingest a very dilute solution of menthol, that it is activating the same kind of cool sensors and cold receptors in your skin or in your mouth and oral cavity that responds the exact same as if you were cold. The cold receptors fire and you get that sensation of cooling, even though there is absolutely no change in your temperature. So the idea is really a perceptual one. It is making your body or your skin feel that it is cooler. And again, we talked about the perceptual benefits of that. So there have been kind of the consensus statement actually is coming out soon in Sports Medicine Journal. I know because I was a peer reviewer for it, and I quite liked the overall review. And the consensus is that for a lot of kind of activities, it can work. It does give that transient feel of being cooler than normal, and that can allow you to again reset that perceptual willingness to exercise. So yes, the studies have been with rinsing with a menthol solution, or else using some kind of a menthol type gel over your body. And some studies have looked at it on the chest, others looked at it on kind of the face and the head and neck area. And overall, it's generally been effective. But again, the way it works is that it activates those exact same cold receptors as if your skin was cold and give you that feeling of being cooler than normal. And then that provides you with that perceptual cue that you can still be working hard.
Yeah, the 2013 study I mentioned earlier. So here's the title of it. Here's an interesting mix. The effect of ice slushy ingestion and mouthwash on thermoregulation and endurance performance in the heat. And they, so I remember, said pretty much what you just said, which is it's completely, well, they did say with the slushy, yes, there was actually a cooling effect, create a heat sink. With the mouthwash, it was completely sensory. So it could help performance because you believed that you were cooler, but there was no actual cooling effect. And I believe they said, so you do have to be careful because if you are starting to suffer from some form of heat stroke, this can convince you that you are better regulating heat than you are.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, on the theme of cold and feeling cold, should we jump into the cold myths now? Back to familiar territory for you guys. Let's ask the first question as it pertains to cold, as we did with heat. Can we adapt to cold?
It's much harder to adapt to cold. Our body, we evolved from a very kind of a warm weather ancestors. So the capacity to adapt to cold is relatively minimal to almost none in terms of physiology compared to heat. But I think it comes down to most of the adaptation is perceptual, that we're just become desensitized to cold. And you can see this at play. I know, again, we talked about some of the studies I've done looking at cold response in the hands and blood flow. Well, if you stick your hand in cold water, the first minute or two, it's really, really uncomfortable. But then after a while, it's not as if your skin temperature has gotten any warmer, but it doesn't feel as bad. So a lot of it is that perceptual. Just like if you jump into a cold lake, the first couple of minutes are really, really uncomfortable. Then after a while, you become sensitized to it. The skin receptors, the cold receptors in your skin are still firing the same amount, but it's your brain tuning down that signal, saying, oh, okay, it's not that big a deal after all. But there is some kind of long-term adaptation to cold. There is, but in terms of your metabolism and everything, but it is really, really minor. And in terms of a performance standpoint, it's not really kind of significant as it is with heat. So overall, there is some kind of minor physiological adaptation, but it is nowhere near the amount that we can adapt in terms of what we're able to in the heat.
So if somebody was preparing for the I Did a Bike or some long race in Alaska, there wouldn't really be a benefit to going into a cold chamber, and except for the psychological benefits, there wouldn't be a physiological benefit here to prepping in that way.
Yeah, there'd be very, very minor, but it's not as if the case that, your substrate metabolism is going to change lock, stock, and barrel, or your muscles become adapted to being able to fire, when even the same strength, even when it's cold. There's nothing like that. Equivalent to the lower heart rate that you see with heat, or the lower core temperature, or the higher sweat rate. So again, I'm convinced the vast majority of any of that benefit is more perceptual than anything physiological.
Okay, so you sent one to us that is a great one that I was embarrassed I didn't even think to put on the list. Can you damage your lungs riding in the cold?
I would say right off the bat that no, you can't really damage your lungs, because there actually have been studies and where they have had individuals exercising, breathing gas that is as cold as, I think, minus 25 degrees Celsius. And they also put a temperature sensor kind of down your airway and in your trachea and into kind of the upper part of your lung kind of beds. And what they found was that even with breathing through the mouth, your body is so good at warming the inspired air that by the time it gets to your actual sensitive tissue in your lungs, it is pretty much at room or your body temperature already. So and that's even with breathing gas that is minus 25 degrees Celsius. So we're talking 60 degrees colder than your body temperature. So your body is extremely effective at protecting yourself. So you're not going to damage the actual alveoli or the actual really kind of thin, sensitive air exchange kind of beds in your lungs from breathing cold air. So you don't have to worry about that. On the other hand, it can be uncomfortable. So one of the things you can do is, in the wintertime, I often wear a buff neck warmer, and I just have that over my mouth just to slow down the airflow a little bit. So can you actually damage your lung tissue? No. But so don't worry about it. Keep in mind that you also have cross-country skiers who are competing also sometimes in extreme cold and breathing huge amounts of air, and their lungs aren't damaged either. So don't really worry about that. If it feels uncomfortable, wear a bandana, wear a buff, and just to kind of slow down that air and also to warm up some of that exhaled air. The other thing to keep in mind, though, when you're in the cold is that you can still lose a lot of moisture and water from your body, and also heat from breathing, because again, if we're breathing in minus 25 degree air, that is 60 degrees colder than your body, and you are now breathing out all of that air that you have now warmed up, and you're losing that heat, and you are also humidifying that air so that it again doesn't damage your lungs with dry air. So you are also losing that water also. So you still need to keep in mind that you can still lose a lot of heat and also water through breathing when you are exercising in the cold. And that's especially dramatic when you can just see it, right? When you breathe out and you have that big, huge mist coming out of your mouth, that's all water vapor, right? That is all warm water vapor that is now kind of being lost from your body.
And another thing worth pointing out that you wrote extensively about in your book is that it can be difficult for asthmatics.
Yeah, that's the huge kind of caveat. If you have sensitivities such as asthma or exercise-induced bronchoconstriction, that breathing in of cold air oftentimes is a big trigger for that. So, that is one population that really needs to keep that in mind, that if you are troubled by it, then one of the things you can do is to warm up much more gradually, and don't just immediately go in and start doing intervals and breathing huge amounts of air. And start by really gradually warming up. Maybe if you can, warm up indoors, so you really kind of warm up that whole respiratory system of yours. And then even once you get outdoors, continue that gradual warm up before pushing yourself really hard and sucking in a lot of air at once.
So now we get to my soapbox, which I'm not sure there's much more to cover, but is it better to be overdressed or underdressed? And let's answer that question both for training and for racing. And you know where I stand.
Yeah, I would certainly agree with you that it's much better in training and even most of the time in racing to overdress than underdress. I know, again, I tend to be horrible in the cold in terms of, again, when it's just at above freezing, those early spring races. And unless I'm really overdressed, I'm going to be much worse off, because I just can't feel my feet. I can't push as hard because my muscles aren't warm. So I'm definitely with you in terms of training. I would if there's any doubt, again, it almost will never hurt to wear one more layer of clothing than you think you need, whereas wearing one less layer can be really bad news. Again, not only in terms of discomfort, but also, like you say, Trevor, damage, especially when we're talking about your knees and your leg muscles. And then in racing, again, it really depends on personal preference and how much does having that knee warmer bother you or not. I think, again, if push comes to shove, I would rather wear those knee warmers than not, if I had any doubt in my mind. And so I mean, I largely agree with you in terms of your stance on that too.
And I am right now looking at notes from a whole bunch of studies showing that it can cause muscle tearing, it could cause damage, it reduces performance. We'll put all those references up, but I think the title of this one study from 2016 says it all. Just title is Increased Risk of Muscle Tears Below Physiological Temperature Ranges.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, you just think of, certainly, if you think of, you're going to go to the gym and you're going to try to do a world record squat, right? Are you going to do it in a really cold room, or are you going to do it in a warm room? Are you going to do a warm up beforehand or not? And, most of the time, I would think most sane people would do a warm up and would choose a warm environment to do that in. And it is just protecting your muscles from all that micro damage that you can't necessarily see, but it is there and it is happening.
From my point of view too, there is maybe a psychological component here, in that I feel like I'm a colder person, and I will dress with many layers relative to other people that I'm riding with. But I feel like I've gotten used to, not, maybe it's called being uncomfortable, but just that you sweat a little bit more, but then you get used to it type feeling, that comes with maybe overdressing versus underdressing. And I have chosen that, and I prefer, and I've gotten used to it. So there's that too.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things you get used to it in training, and it's not that big of a bother. Again, having that pair of knee warmers on in a race.
Right.
Yeah. The one thing that has been brought up that I feel is the one legitimate counter argument I've heard is, let's say you're somewhere where there's mountains and it's a cold day and you go climbing and you got a lot of layers on, you're going to sweat a lot.
Sure.
And then you turn around, you come down, and now you're getting all that wind chill,
evaporative cooling
on wet clothing, and it can really get you cold. So absolutely. I do, when I'm climbing in the mountains on a cold day, I will unzip a bit so I don't sweat a ton, and then immediately zip everything back up as soon as I get to the top.
Yeah, I mean, the clothing, as you mentioned, Dr. Cheung, has come a really long way, but the onus is on the individual using that good clothing to also thermoregulate to some degree, so they're not drenched at the top of in an example like Trevor has mentioned. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And polar explorers and polar adventurers know the worst thing you can do is to sweat and saturate your clothing, because that's going to cool you off. That's going to also eliminate kind of the thermal properties of the clothing that you're wearing if it is soaked in water. So yes, absolutely. If you're going to be doing if you're, in the mountains and doing climbs and climb and descents, absolutely. Whether you take off some layers or unzip on the climb up, because you're going to be generating a lot of heat. And also you're not going to be going that fast. So you're not going to get a huge amount of convective cooling. And then at the top, then you can put on that dry clothing again. I think that's definitely the best plan to have, because the very worst thing is to be wearing really saturated, sweated clothing and then hitting a big descent or things like that, because you're going to have so much extra heat loss. And that thermal garment isn't going to work nearly as well when it's soaking wet compared to when it's dry.
Embrocation. This is one I like to ask, because as someone who does a lot of cyclocross, I tend to see the people rubbing embrocation on their legs frantically before races on cold days, and I just shake my head at them. So, Dr. Cheung, does embrocation really work?
Yeah, I'm completely with you. I love cyclocross too, and there's nothing in a sense that beats the smell of kind of embro to kind of get you all psyched for racing. But the active ingredient in embrocation is capsaicin. It's the same as when you eat really spicy food. So what does that actually do? It is kind of the opposite of menthol. Instead of activating your cold receptors, it is activating your heat receptors. Now, again, it is not actually physically warming you up. It is activating those skin receptors for heat and fooling you into thinking that you are warm when, again, you are not. So you can look at it as the exact, again, opposite of menthol. It is all perceptual, and there is no physiological change in your body. So you are going to be your skin is going to be just as cold, but you may not feel it. And you can get that damage that we've been talking about, even though you feel that you are warm. Absolutely. The embrocation, smells great, gets you really psyched up. It's intrinsically kind of embedded into the sport of cycling, but does it actually warm up your muscles in any way, shape, or form? No.
I'll actually add that embrocation also promotes vasodilation at the skin, or just below the skin, which means when it's cold outside, you are getting blood flow to your skin, which means you're going to be releasing heat, which is the exact opposite of what you want.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and but again, it definitely doesn't penetrate down to the muscles,
No.
So it is not as if it is causing greater circulation in your muscles and improving blood flow there.
But it smells good.
It does smell good. This is no longer the case, but important thing to remember, because a lot of amateurs have seen pros on really cold days out in just a jersey and shorts, putting the Embro on and racing that way and go, well, the pros do it, we got to do it. There was, until just a few years back, a UCI rule that you were not allowed to use knee and arm warmers. So they had no choice.
Right. And you got those little heating plasters that you see look like big Band-Aids that they put right on the front of their knee, under their kind of kneecap, to protect their patellar tendons. So yeah, you do see those kind of things too.
Nick Ligon also had a lot to say about riding and racing in the cold. Let's hear his suggestions.
Tell us a little bit more about how you managed your body temperature and the conditions when it was cold like that.
Yeah. I mean, full disclaimer, it's not like I've done the Iditarod Invitational, Trail Invitational. You know, those athletes are doing something really, I mean, some of the stuff I've done. Extreme. Yeah.
It is.
And I haven't done a lot. I do fat bike. I do have some of that experience, but not to that extent.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm on the saner end of this spectrum. But I've certainly, ridden in snow and rain and sleet for hours on end. And it can be really mentally tough. But I've also found that a friend of mine says there's no bad weather. There's only bad clothing.
Right. I've heard that before.
Or bad preparation.
Yeah, right.
So having the right...
Sounds like something a Boy Scout might say.
Yeah, well, always be prepared.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was a Boy Scout. That's probably not news to you.
No, you're a thinker, man.
Yeah. But yeah, I've found that there's some, for me, and again, I think everyone's experience is unique, but for me, I've definitely found some key pieces of clothing that have made a real difference for me. So a few of them, obviously headgear is important. You want it to be warm without being too hot, because then you can, when it's cold, you want to try not to be wet.
Yeah. Right.
It's kind of the opposite of when you're hot in a way.
Yeah.
But it's for the same reason. It's evaporative cooling.
Exactly.
If you can, for instance, you and I have done a ride before, and I'm going to call you out a little bit, where you don't take layers off on the climb and you just get to the top and you're soaked, and then we descend and we're cold. And maybe you don't do that every time. I hope not, Chris.
No.
But it's important, when you're starting that climb on a cold day, that you take off that jacket and you maybe start that climb a little cold, so that you can do the whole climb without having to stop a bunch to don or doff layers. I love a buff. I really love, I'm talking like a neck gaiter thing. Not everyone knows what a buff is, but buff is a brand of them.
Yes.
You can take it off for the climb, you throw it back on. You can pull it over your face for the descent, up and over your ears. They're just really versatile.
Yep.
You can wear that as a headband, an ear band, a hat. Those are really, really, really great for me. And I typically carry more than one of them too, so that if one does get wet, I put it in a pocket and I pull a dry one out. If you're going to be out there for a really long time, even bringing a spare base layer can be really helpful. And again, just getting dry. I almost always have a vest and a jacket, because they do different things. One thing I don't mean to name drop, but I'm going to. I was hanging out with Taylor Finney the other day, and we were talking about how we love all the bike packing bags just for training, because you can throw a puffy jacket and rain pants in there.
Yes.
And bigger booties for your shoes, some dry socks, things like that. And how that is just like, wow, training is so much more pleasant now when you're dry and
when
warm.
You can bring the things you actually need instead of suffering through another long ride and sort of like shivering maybe a little.
Yeah, think of those bike packing bags as your very own personal follow car.
It's your little closet.
Yeah, it's a rolling closet.
But
But those make a big difference, I oftentimes in winter, I have to plug Shimano. We do make a winter boot, like a Gore-Tex waterproof boot that's insulated, that really helps in those shoulder seasons. Even if it's just kind of wet out, that can be really helpful. But I think another thing to recognize is if you're into the ultra thing, and I think a lot of my advice skews that way because that's the scene I'm in most recently, but bigger shoes than normal.
Right.
The same shoe that you normally ride, but maybe a half size or a size up, lets you put in thicker socks, or even thicker socks. And this is ghetto, but trash bags, like the grocery bags.
Vapor barrier.
Exactly. It's a vapor barrier. And if you don't know what a vapor barrier is, Google it. But the principle is, though, it's better to be warm and wet than cold and dry. And that's what it does. And it's very effective, as long as you don't then take it off. You got to kind of stick with it. But the vapor barrier is really, really helpful, especially on your feet. For hand, it's extremities that a lot of people suffer with. So your feet, that's one way to go. For your hands, I love a wool glove liner. Defeat makes one that is my favorite, because it also has that electronic. You can still use your phone and still Instagram.
And they're cheap.
They are. They're great. And then I've actually, I don't own a motorcycle anymore, but I have in the past. And I've been running these gauntlets, like a lobster style rain mitt. And with just the rain mitt and the Defeat wool glove liner, I'm pretty comfortable, even if it's snowing down to 25 degrees. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of my bike pack race setup. And that's all the gloves I carry. So the idea being you've got something that works and it insulates even when it's wet, wool. And then you've got a layer that keeps the wind and the wet off, so you're that much warmer.
Yeah.
So little things like that can go a long way.
Are there any things that you would recommend for equipment when it comes to riding and racing in really cold weather? Do people need to be careful with their equipment because it's more brittle in super cold temperatures?
Yeah, especially if you're talking about plastic things. I mean, I wouldn't worry about carbon fiber. Like your frame is fine.
Yeah.
But if you're looking at like little plastic accessories like a Garmin mount or a GPS mount, some of those, if you're in really, really cold temps, absolutely. I mean, not that you should lean on that mount anyway, but it will make some things brittle. Equipment that's really made a big difference for me, pogies, if you know what those are.
No, I don't.
A pogie it's developed for, I think actually it came in like skiing or maybe dog sledding or something. But basically it goes over, bar mitts makes them. And they go over the controls of your bike. So they'll make them for flat bars, they'll make them for drop bars.
I see.
And it basically creates this little pocket around your shifter and brake lever. And then you put your hand in there. And if you're riding in really cold temps, I hate the term game changer, but it is like you suddenly can ride in a really thin glove. That can be really helpful. There's a lot of really great winter boot options. One thing I would also say is a wet lube on your chain. Run a wet lube. When it's cold out, you want something that is actually penetrating. And some would argue that you should run a wet lube all the time because that's what's actually penetrating the rollers and pins of your chain better than a dry lube. But when it's cold out, it's oftentimes sloppy out too.
Right.
So
yep.
Stopping to lube your chain is cold. So the other thing is, stopping to change a flat is cold. So maybe running a beefier tire in winter.
Yes, absolutely.
Because a flat tire in winter is not fun.
You don't want to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Next one. Let's see. If you had one extra piece of clothing on you and you were freezing cold, where would you put it? On your head, on your hands, on your feet, or your core?
Let's keep this PG, Chris.
This is probably about the time that I turn around and go home if I have to make that choice. But there's no real kind of one ideal. I mean, ideally, you would have your head protected. You would have your hands and feet protected too. I know that's a big issue with me. I need to make sure. I usually wear much thicker gloves than my wife when we go out to ride together, and she always just looks at me like I'm demented. But I know I have real trouble with my hands. So if I had one choice, I would probably pick my hands. But I think I have this Bell helmet from a few years back, that star kind of helmet with the arrow kind of switch that you can just close the vents. And I love that helmet for these spring and fall days because I can still kind of be relatively warm in it, and then if I do really warm up, then I can just open up the vents. But if I had one piece of clothing to pick that is warmer than normal, I would pick my hands because I know personally I'm really sensitive to that. And also, if I can't shift or brake, then I become a hazard to myself.
That's true. That is very true.
So I was always very much on the protect the extremities, but actually a really interesting point in your textbook was the fact that if you think about it, when the extremities get really cold, that's because your body's no longer sending blood to the extremities in order to protect the core. And if you wear clothing to keep the core warm, your body's going to be more willing to allow blood flow to the extremities. So in reality, it's you really should be doing both.
Yeah, there was a nice kind of study by my lab mate during my PhD, also at the military lab, which was looking at, in a sense, that exact question. If you had a particular amount of heat that you can put to the body, where would you put it? Would you kind of put it with, in a sense, heated gloves, or would you put it in the core? And the overall consensus from that study was that it would be best to be in the core, because if your core is warm, first, that's a good thing. And then second of all, it is going to allow more blood to flow to the extremities. So from that perspective, if you had kind of heating, where would you put it? I think the best place is to keep your core warm. And that's really what your body is trying to do in general anyways. But again, if the question was, if I could either pick a warmer than normal glove, shoe cover, or, kind of a buff over my head, I would probably pick gloves, because I know personally I'm really, really sensitive with hands in the cold.
Won't lie. I love my heated socks.
I knew you were going to say that.
I absolutely love my heat. I wear them inside.
Man, you're getting pretty wimpy.
Yeah.
Wearing heated socks inside?
Yeah, I'm getting old.
This is after you've put on your Mr. Rogers sweater, or your cardigan, and taken off your loafers.
Yeah,
You're
pretty
getting
much.
old. You're
Okay,
getting old.
there we go.
All right, Dr. Cheung, I don't know if you remember or not from the previous time on the show, but we like to close out with our take-home messages. You get 1 minute to encapsulate your life's work, or at least all of the things we talked about in this episode. So yeah, what would you say is the most important message for people to take away from this episode?
I would say the most important message is, don't fear the extremes. I know we've been talking about a lot of crazy studies that I do, but, I kind of do them so that you don't have to. But the big thing is, you can exercise in extreme heat. You can exercise in extreme cold, as long as you take kind of precautions. And some are long-term precautions, such as if you're going to be training or racing in the heat, to become gradually over time, to be adapted to heat, to have appropriate cooling strategies, hydration strategies, all of these things. And then really listen to your body, being really in tune with it, and go with your brain, because your brain is there ultimately to protect you. And I think that is the biggest takeaway message for the heat. For the cold is you don't want to risk damage to your body. So you want to stay warm. So again, overdress rather than underdress is the general rule. And you can't really adapt to it. So the only thing you can do is behavior, which means warming up gradually and using clothing. So I would say those are the big kind of takeaway messages to have. And again, otherwise you can go and exercise. You can compete in the heat and cold. We've seen that in the Tour Down Under. We've seen that in extreme events like Marathon des Sables, and we've also seen that in Polar Explorers. It can be done with a combination of right clothing, right attitude, and right kind of physiological preparation.
Trevor, what do you got?
I am contractually obligated to this 1 minute,
Yes.
which is, in cold weather, overdress, don't underdress. To give you one of the guidelines that everybody's shocked by, below 70 degrees Fahrenheit, 21 degrees Celsius, knee warmers. Below about 55, 60 degrees Fahrenheit, around 14, 15 degrees Celsius, leg warmers. I am likewise contractually obligated that if I'm ever on a ride with one of our listeners and you are underdressed, I will bow my head and nod back and forth slowly in complete disappointment.
And the head motion would not be up and down. It would be from side to side. Yes.
Chris?
Well, I have no contractual obligations, but I will talk about the sort of the psychological component here, as I love to do. Yeah, I think I mentioned it already. The human body is capable of doing a lot of things to keep within that range that it loves to operate in. We've discussed it's the mechanisms by which it does that. There's the clothing component that is critical there, but I think on top of all of that, one's mindset is almost as critical here. And you can get used to things gradually. You can throw yourself into the deep end in certain situations with some amount of caution to see how you react to it and realize, oh, that's really not that bad, or, oh, I can deal with this, or get used to it. So despite all the things, or because of all the things that we've said, and in regards to the psychological component, yeah, it's like Dr. Cheung said, you can do these things with the right preparation and the right mindset and the right equipment. So get out there. And we live in a place, Trevor, now. You lived in a place before that allowed you to test the capabilities of cold weather riding. Now you live in a place where extreme temperature changes and weather changes are a daily occurrence. So we get to practice all of this all the time.
5 coldest rides. We're all in Colorado.
Yeah. Can get nasty here quick.
Yep.
Well, thank you again, Dr. Cheung. That was an excellent discussion. Always a pleasure having you on the show.
Well, thanks for having me back, and hope we can get together for a ride sometime soon.
Yeah, absolutely.
Agreed.
Hopefully not in your chamber or anything like one of the conditions you try to mimic in that chamber.
You anticipated what I was actually...
Yes, I did. Yes, I did. The mad scientist. I knew what you were thinking. That was another episode of Fast Talk. As always, we love your feedback. Email us at fasttalk@fastlabs.com, or if you prefer, record a question on your phone and send us the file. Subscribe to Fast Talk wherever you prefer to find your favorite podcasts. Be sure to leave us a rating and a review. The thoughts and opinions expressed on Fast Talk are those of the individual. For Dr. Stephen Cheung, Nick Legan, Whitney Garcia, and Trevor Connor, I'm Chris Case. Thanks for listening.